Good and welcome to the Niggly Nichecast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc, and as always, joined by the Wobbly Wildcard. Today we are here to talk our way through the one and only Steven Adams, basketball extraordinaire, playing for the Oklahoma City Thunder in the NBA. We are going to just talk through his performances. NBA regular season's winding down, so we're going to suss out how his regular season's gone and any playoff chances. I do believe the Oklahoma City Thunder have sealed some type of NBA playoffs spot, which is good, and hopefully they can make a couple of waves in the NBA playoffs as well. So we're going to talk our way through all things Steven Adams. And before we get on to a little bit of a beautiful way to start this podcast via the Wobbly Wildcard, shout out to our Patreon. Anyone on Patreon supporting the Nichecast on Patreon, you're a beautiful soul. And anyone else listening to this, head on over to Patreon if you're feeling generous and support the Nichecast on Patreon, because it's an easy way to show your support to the Nichecast. It's the best way to show your support. And it only costs you $1 a month, depending on how generous you want to be. And we're just working our way through ensuring that our patrons get some beautiful kickbacks in terms of special content. We want to make sure that there's a constant stream of goodies coming the way of the patrons as well in the future. So if you do like the Nichecast, if you do like the Nichecast, head on over the Patreon link. And support the Nichecast on Patreon, because once again, gotta say it is the best way to support the Nichecast. Nothing else really touches our heart like getting a new Patreon for the Nichecast, just because it's a incredibly generous act and it keeps us firing on all cylinders. It actually keeps petrol in our tank, food in our bellies. So it's very important to our survival as human beings on planet Earth as we seek truth. Wildcard.
Yeah, speaking of truths, you want to hear the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism? I've been studying.
Oh, that might set me off today in a nice little way.
Well, I'll steady on, because number one is that life is suffering, which is perhaps a little bit of, I guess, an easy one to misinterpret. I find it quite a beautiful thought in my own way. I think the fact that life is suffering is something that, I don't know, is quite empowering. It tells people that they're not being picked upon when they're going through the process. Number two, suffering is attachment to desires, which is a very, very Buddhist thing to think, isn't it? That your possessions, that your worldly possessions, are somehow anchoring you to a life below the level of enlightenment that we seek. Relatively self-explanatory, I suppose. Number three, suffering ceases when attachment to desire ceases. In other words, let go of those worldly possessions and, grow some wings and fly. And number four is that freedom from suffering is possible through the Eightfold Path, which is going to need a little bit of a, what would you call it, an add-on here. I'm going to have to tack on the actual Eightfold Path, which is the right view, the right intention, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right concentration. Doc, what do you reckon? Are you feeling enlightened after that?
Bloody oath.
It's the Four Noble Truths.
It did align with something I heard yesterday on I think it was a Rich Roll podcast, and one of his guests was talking about, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something about everyone having a hidden story or some sort of fake story. So if someone came to this person, or I'm going to say me, because I'm a pretty special human being and for this example, I'm going to sound like an absolute spiritual master. If someone came to me, for example, and, asked for advice or had problems, it'll be, the question you got to ask is, what is your, hidden story? Because that is the reason that you're having whatever problems you're having in your life, is because you're not living 100% in truth. There's something that eats away at you that then leads into how you interact with other people, how you interact with yourself, and instead of looking outside, you've got to look within yourself and ask yourself, what is the story that I am telling myself? Or what is the story that I am not addressing in my life that then has such a profound influence on how everything else in my life interacts with my energy, I guess?
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's also tied in with in a lot of podcasts. There's people are talking about protons and electrons in your body, and how the mere fact that you do have electrons in your body, because when you're talking about energy inside your body, it gets a bit weird, and some the baby boomers of middle class New Zealand get a bit touchy feely. They get a bit, oh God, what's that? But the mere fact that you have electrons in your body should serve as a simple example that your body is just made up of energy, let alone all the spiritual connotations. Obviously chi is a big one. All the spiritual practices kind of channel that energy, but just from a real basic standpoint, the fact that you have electrons in your body kind of points to the fact that you have energy flowing in your body. And to wrap it back around, if you're not living your truth, if you're not addressing, if you don't know about the story that you're telling yourself or the story that you're hiding from yourself, then your energy and inside you is not in the best position. My words here are absolute terrible when talking on such a matter, but if you're you get my drift here, Wildcard?
I get your drift. If you're not if I sort of picture it in my head rather than explaining it in words. If you're not all in alignment, the life that you're living versus the person that you are versus sort of the life that you want to lead, if those things aren't in alignment, then neither will you be as a person. And I should specify as well that thing about attachment to desires. I sort of said something about worldly possessions. It's deeper than just your phone, it's worldly possessions. You yourself are a worldly possession, and attachment desire is basically the act of serving the ego in whatever form that takes. So ignoring your not ignoring but overcoming your own personal intents and desires is a pretty massive part of that whole thing. Overcoming them in a way not where you are like a robot who just functions without thought, but overcoming them in a way where you are, in alignment with others and living for your community and your planet and these kind of things, rather than just what will benefit me. How can I make my next $1 million, and who can I step on along the way?
An attachment to the ideas that you've had about yourself, because yes, exactly. I think that's the story idea, is that you kind of get stuck into this story of who you are, and that your sorrow or your limitations that you place on yourself is simply the story that you have built for yourself. And so if you get attached to that story, you're kind of fucked. And you got to get out of that mindset, and you got to get out of that. You got to detach yourself from that story, that hidden story. So it all comes together beautifully there, Wildcard. What an introduction. It's a bloody Wednesday morning, and we're just out here helping our listeners with a little bit of information. The Stevie Adams, Stevie Adams wildcard. To kick things off here, I think the best thing we can do is just offer a bit of a synopsis of Steven Adams throughout the season. Just a bit of a plot narrative breakdown of how Steven Adams has flowed throughout the season, and I have a feeling that might coincide with how the Oklahoma City Thunder have flowed through the season. So if you can just get your best storytelling boots on and just offer the listeners a plot synopsis of Steven Adams in the 2018-19 NBA season up to this point.
Well, luckily I never go anywhere without my storytelling boots, so I can tell you now that he started relatively, solidly, and as did the team, although I remember they lost their first 4 games. It was a little bit of a struggle when Westbrook was injured to start, but they slowly eased into things. By the time you got to November, they were playing pretty well. By the time you got to December, Steven Adams was playing so well they were talking about all-star possibilities, which is never particularly likely. I know we tried to beat that up because it's fun to support our lad, but realistically, if Rudy Gobert didn't even make the all-star selection, then Steven Adams wasn't going to. But it doesn't mean we can't back the fella. And he in that month of December in particular, I think he was averaging something along the lines of sort of 17 and 11 or something like that just in that month, and he was really churning them out. And then as we got into January, it slowed down a little bit from his production standpoint as others around him picked it up, and you had Terrence Ferguson, the young fella, young wing who came up. He came up in the American high school system, but instead of going to college when he had some weird thing, he went and played a year for the Adelaide 36ers in Australia and got drafted out of the NBL, which was a bit of a game changer when that happened. So he started hitting 3-pointers, and Jeremy Grant really started scoring points, who'd pushed his way in as the starting power forward next to Steven Adams in that starting lineup. He started being a real factor as a scorer, and you had Paul George all of a sudden was playing like the goddamn MVP, just MVPG, just dropping shots all over the place and playing excellent defense. And they were winning a lot of games in January, and then into February as well. Then came the All-Star break, and to be honest, leading into the All-Star break, Steven Adams was starting to look a little, I don't know if tired is the right word, or maybe perhaps he was playing through a couple injuries. He's always got 6 or 7 injuries on the go, I'd imagine, with a guy like that who plays the way that he does. And since the All-Star break, the Thunder came out, and I think as of the most recent game, which was a loss to Memphis, they are 7-11, I think, their record since the All-Star break. And before that, they were just, they were winning games for fun. They were cruising up, sitting around that sort of not going to challenge the first 2 seeds, which are Denver and Golden State, but they're looking pretty solid to push for 3rd and hold off Houston for that one. Now all of a sudden they briefly dropped as low as 8. They're not going to miss the playoffs because teams like Sacramento, Minnesota, the Lakers, these teams are just all too far off. They're not going to be overcome the distance. So there's 8 teams pretty well set in the West who are going to make the playoffs. It's just a matter of what seeds, because obviously, if you finish, 7th or 8th, you're either going to have to play the Golden State Warriors, which is pretty much an automatic defeat, or you're going to have to play the Denver Nuggets, who are the best home field advantage team in the NBA, and you'd be giving them home field advantage. I'd suggest that's a very likely defeat as well. It's not exactly the situation you want to be in, considering, the circumstances they were in before. There's a few reasons for why the team have slumped. There's, Paul George has been dealing with a couple shoulder injuries. On top of that, he's also just getting guarded a lot harder, and it's just tougher for him to score, tougher for him to get free. Guys like Ferguson, Jeremy Grant's held it up all right, but Ferguson and Dennis Schroeder have dropped off. Schroeder's just been inconsistent. Ferguson's just plain started missing shots all over the place. So the role players aren't doing as much. Russell Westbrook actually is. Russell Westbrook's playing as well as he has all season. He's shooting his best. He's getting triple doubles, same as always. But he's not going to be able to do it himself. And Steven Adams, if we're being completely honest, just hasn't quite looked himself since the All-Star break. We thought that having a bit of a week off would, really like roll the fella up again, get him, freshen him up, get him going, soothe over whatever happened to ail him. But he's, I don't know, it's been a little bit weird. He doesn't seem to have quite the same energy he normally has, and he's missing shots. But having said that, he cops some pressure just because OKC fans are getting a bit frustrated at the way things are going. So naturally, there will be backlash against players who aren't performing, aren't putting up the numbers that they had been earlier on. And Steven Adams is definitely one of those. But defensively, I don't think it's fair at all to say that he's slipped up there. I think, especially in the last week or so, you're seeing him getting blocks and steals all over the show. I think he's putting up the defensive numbers. He's just missing shots, and he's also not having the game go his way particularly because they've got quite a lot of guys who have gotten used to taking a lot of shots, and they're currently missing those shots. And yeah, it's a bit funky. I think the fact that we've seen the Thunder do a lot better than this in the past is proof that they can steady the ship and get going again, because they have, to be fair, had a really tough run of fixtures out of that All-Star break, and for the rest of the season, the last 7 or 8 games or whatever it is, they do have a lot of, I think, 6 of them are at home or something like that, including at least half of them against teams from outside the playoff picture. So they should be able to get a few runs going. Hopefully they're a confidence team and they'll be able to take that into the playoffs. We're starting to see them sort of like shrinking that rotation a little bit, which is a glimpse of what we're going to see in the playoffs, which looks to me like Nerlens Noel is not going to play a whole lot, which means that Steven Adams is going to play a whole lot, probably with Markieff Morris, who's a better shooter, as his backup. So it's there are definitely interesting times on the Steven Adams bandwagon, Doc. I'll say that much.
Have you noticed any trend in terms of his minutes during this recent kind of February-March stint? Like you're saying that he looks a bit tired and there may be a few niggling injuries. Has that led to a slight decrease in minutes in terms of like managing his workload, or has it just come, shit, we're losing games, we need to win games and Steven Adams needs to play more, and that's just got like, you would think it's like leading into the playoffs, you would want Steven Adams feeling fresh, you would want him feeling powerful and just ready to rip into any type of playoff team, where playoff basketball is more suited to Steven Adams than perhaps the grind and just the quantity of regular season basketball. So have you noticed any kind of usage trend for Steven Adams in the recent times?
Yeah, like you're absolutely right. I completely agree with that. That Adams is a guy who's more suited to the playoff thing, where you've got a specific role. You're guarding one guy in multiple games, back to back, sort of thing. And I think we've already seen him from him in the past that he does thrive under those circumstances. I'm not so sure that fellas like Westbrook and Paul George necessarily do. At least they haven't in the past. In the very recent past. I'm just talking since Durant left, kind of thing. In terms of his minutes, I think you did see that trend in like pre-All-Stars. Nerlens Noel was getting more minutes and they were working out a little more of the roster, and they just didn't need Steven Adams as much because he wasn't, his numbers dropped, but I'm not, I'd have to check this, but I don't think his actual like rate of production dropped a whole lot. I think it was more that instead of playing 35 minutes a game, maybe he was playing more like 32, and he was getting a couple less shots per game because of that. And that's always a frustration, because I think if you got Steven Adams, who's a pretty, like, he scores at like 65%, you might as well just see if you can push the ball to him a couple times when your team's struggling. But the Thunder tend to be a team who, when they're not doing too well, they up the pace and try to play, shoot more threes and play quicker in transition and that kind of thing. Doesn't always necessarily suit, but whatever, is the way it goes. Steven Adams is not the guy to demand that he gets more touches, so other people are going to step up and take some of those extra ones. That's, it's his job. He's only worried about doing his role. He's happy to just defend well and take 2 shots a game if it means the team wins. Since the All-Stars, I think it's been more of a game by game type thing. I don't think he's necessarily played less just because he isn't doing as much or because he isn't scoring or whatever. I think it's been more like the games when it's feasible to pick the extra shooter at the 5 and chuck Markieff Morris out there or something like that, or even Jeremy Grant sliding up. Those games, perhaps we've seen a little bit less of him. There'll be times in the fourth quarter where he doesn't get as much of a run because they're going with the hot hands somewhere else. It's also like there was a game in Miami recently where he fouled out, played through foul trouble for a lot of the way, only played 25 minutes, which was a shame because he was actually playing really well that game. He was I think he had I can't remember how many points he scored. It was like 12 points and 12 rebounds or something along those lines, which in 25 minutes, pretty solid. You imagine if he got another 10 minutes to his normal, what he might have done there in those circumstances. I think we will see him heading back towards 35, 36 minutes more often as the rest of the season finishes, just because I think they're ironing out that playoff rotation. However, having said that, I mean, if they're blow out the Mavs and the Lakers, then there's no need for him to play much, and that's where you're going to probably find him getting his rest, which I'd suggest he needs. I think if I had to, it's probably a little bit dangerous to be speculating in such ways, but I have to guess as to what might be slowing him down. He had a hand injury earlier in the season, and I reckon just based on some of his continually average free throw shooting, although he has tended to get worse as the season goes on with free throws in the past, but I mean some of his inabilities to put back some of those close range, those little layups and the offensive rebounds that putbacks that he gets that he's normally so good with. I'd suggest that maybe there's been a recurrence of that, but I mean that's just speculation. I got no idea. I'm just making excuses for the fella, I guess.
And my other kind of technical question is that since Kevin Durant left, we saw quite a clear style of play from Steven Adams with Russell Westbrook, which is, pick and roll heavy, a lot of dunks and a lot of alley-oops for Steven Adams. But the Thunder have changed quite a lot since Paul George became Paul George 2.0. So how is Steven Adams play when the Oklahoma City were at their best, and hopefully they are, assuming they get back to their best for playoff basketball, how does Steven Adams fit with Paul George playing at an MVP sort of level? Because it was quite clear how Steven Adams played with Russell Westbrook playing at some sort of MVP level. So how does Steven Adams play alongside Paul George when Paul George is just at such a high level in the NBA?
Fair question. I mean, the main thing is that Westbrook is still going to be carrying the ball up over the midcourt. He's still going to be controlling plays and dishing out assists and all this. So it shouldn't affect Adams that much in that area, and I don't think it has over the course of the season. A little bit in January, because we got to be honest, when Paul George was at his best, Steven Adams saw a noticeable dip in his numbers. Nothing drastic, but definitely a noticeable dip. And I guess a lot of that is just because George was doing so well. He was getting more shots. You give it to the guy who's going to hit the three-pointer, And Paul George gets plenty of ball handling responsibilities. He's quite good at getting his shot up. When he's sort of one-on-one, he doesn't look like an explosive type of player, but he's in his own methodical way. He's pretty quick and pretty effective in that manner. He's not a legendary passer in the way that Russell Westbrook is, so I don't think he looks to Steven Adams as a pick and roll kind of option, but he does. I mean, Adams is dropping some monster screens for the fella, which is never going to change regardless of how many points Adams or how many shots Adams is getting up in a game. So it's not like they don't have a good combination going. It's just maybe a little bit more favored towards Paul George getting the shot off in the end of the shot clock rather than Steven Adams, rolling to the hoop. But I don't know. I think I don't think it's a stylistic change. I think it's just a matter of there's only so many shots to go around. And it's not just Paul George either. It's guys like Terrence Ferguson, Jeremy Grant, Dennis Schroeder have been demanding more shots. So Schroeder plays with the bench usually, so he's not around with Adams as often. And also Schroeder, he's not a guy who he's definitely a score first point guard in that sort of modern mold, but he can throw an okay pass, and he does have a little bit of combination going with Steven Adams when they do cross over on court. So that's not one out of the question either. So when there's only so many shots to go around, though, there's only so many shots to go around. You know, the game doesn't get any longer or shorter just because more guys are shooting at a better percentage. There's still going to be 48 minutes regardless. So if more guys are shooting, someone's going to miss out, and Steven Adams is kind of he's the most reliable in terms of field goal percentage, but he's also like the toughest guy to get the ball to in those situations. And right now he's missing shots, so he's not really demanding that he gets anymore. It's just kind of the way it goes over a long and grueling season. There are always these ebbs and flows, I guess, Doc.
But what is Steven Adams' role in Paul George being on fire? Does Steven Adams, is he setting the screens? Is it kind of just get the rebound, get it to Paul George? Is it setting a screen for Paul George to catch and shoot? Have you noticed any kind of trends in how Steven Adams helps Paul George get his points?
Set the screens, come off on the switches if you need be, charge towards the hoop for the offensive rebound, because if someone's shooting from distance, there's a decent, better than average chance that they'll probably miss, so you want to get that second possession, kick it out back to Paul George, those kind of things. He's just the dirty work, same old as he does with everyone else. He does have a little bit more of a distinct combination with Russell Westbrook just because they've played together for so long, so there is a more specific thing going on there where you add in the pick and roll game, and even that isn't a major extension from what he would otherwise be doing and what he does with Paul George and what he does with other fellas around there. He just sort of it's just like laying the foundations, I guess you would say. And interesting point on his defensive rebound, because he still isn't. He's getting more defensive rebounds this year, but he's not gone. He's still getting as many offensive ones as he does defensive ones, especially recently as well. And it's interesting that the numbers could be higher were he a more sort of selfish center, as people have often said. Russell Westbrook gobbles up the rebounds. That's kind of just the way it goes, and it's the way the Thunder want to play too. It's not like Russ is just out there demanding, I need my stats. Russ is out there being like, no, I need the ball in my hands as quick as possible because I'm super quick, and if I can run at this team in transition before they're set, that is our best way to easy points. So Steven Adams just boxes out the fella under the hoop, and Russell Westbrook comes through. It's interesting, Russell Westbrook's defensive rebounding stats are considerably better when Steven Adams is on the court than when it isn't. For a center who, doesn't statistically get a whole lot of defensive rebounds, it's kind of telling if you look at the deeper stats. He's also one of the leading guys in box outs for the NBA. Just these things that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily notice, but in a way, I guess the impact is shown in how the guys around him are performing. He just needs to get back to taking care of, putting that ball in the basket when he gets it in his hands.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, because just to lead into my final question, I absorb a lot of NBA content just because I think it's the best kind of sports league in the world in terms of how it's covered and discussion around
Completely
it, but so
agree.
much of the discussion is around statistics, and a lot of it, it's kind of that you definitely have to interpret statistics. You need statistics, and they have such a huge place. But what you said just there about, Steven Adams might not have huge defensive rebound numbers, but what he does is a specific role in how the Oklahoma City Thunder operate, and they want as you said, they want the ball in Russell Westbrook's hands, and so Steven Adams doesn't get the defensive rebound, but his job is to help his teammate get the defensive rebound. It's like, you got to interpret a few different stats, you've got to go down a few different routes, or you've just got to trust your eye with the old eye test to get that insight. So it's like there's not a foolproof way of looking at someone like Steven Adams, who has he's a job doer, he's a role player, he performs his job to help the team be a better team. And someone like that, it's really hard to just judge purely on statistics and numbers that they chuck up, because it's so much more influential than that, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at what his teammates say about him, it's always the most, I think he would say himself that that's the teammates and coaches are the two opinions that he holds on to the most, I would imagine, and they're the two aspects where you get the most, like, those guys don't underestimate what he does, and opposition guys are always talking about how strong he is and how, like, brutal he is to come up against, but I think there's probably a pretty high level of respect as well amongst those guys for the unheralded work kind of thing, and every coach wants players like that, which is kind of like I don't know, I guess it's one of those things we like to think of it as a testament to the old New Zealand spirit of just like put your head down and do the work kind of thing. And he's definitely I mean, he grew up on a farm in Rotorua. He knows the business, old Steve.
And this is my final question. My final idea is that in absorbing so much of that NBA content, there's this like kind of simple narrative of Steven Adams being a tough guy. Like, who would you least want to fight? Who is the toughest guy in the I won't say bloke because it's the NBA, so there's no blokes in the NBA other than Steven Adams. But it's like the Steven Adams is just viewed as a tough guy. And on the one hand, how he plays basketball is perfectly, like, if you could boil New Zealand basketball into one player, it would be Steven Adams. And we pride ourselves on everything that Steven Adams and how he plays basketball is, like that job doing, simple, tough, rugged, humble, or like all of that is typically Kiwi. And it's an amazing thing that the best basketball player kind of from New Zealand ever is playing basketball exactly how Kiwis would hope that someone plays basketball on the world stage. Like, if you want someone to genuinely crack big time NBA over a long period of time, most of us would want that person to represent New Zealand in the way that Steven Adams is doing every single game. And that leads itself into like a reputation of being tough. But my point is that Steven Adams isn't a tough guy. Like, he doesn't strike me as a tough guy. He's not gonna try to fight you. He seldomly actually tries to fight people on the court.
He normally breaks them up.
Yeah, all he does is play basketball, does his job, and other people might want to fight him, which is fine. But it's not, Steven Adams isn't out here like trying to fight people, trying to hurt people. He's just out here playing basketball at a very hard level. And if you talk to him, if you hear Steven Adams talk, there's no tough guy antics with Steven Adams. There's nothing Steven Adams does away from the court to enhance his reputation of being one of the most ruthless like basketball players in the world. So it's like, I think it's a very simple way of looking at Steven Adams.
Yeah, he's not like a Kendrick Perkins like enforcer type. He's just not that dude who's going to go out there do the like the meta world peace thing of just like clobber a bugger because it's out of revenge, or take a fella out because we got to win this game. He just does what he's asked to do, and he's tough and he holds his ground, but he's not like, he doesn't go out of his way to be intimidating or anything like that. I think that's completely fair to say. I mean, he is strong, but I've seen him talking about this himself, where he's like, it's not that he's the strongest, it's just that he's he trains in a way of how to use that body weight, how to use the body weight of guys going up against him. And there was this one clip from a year or two ago. He talked about studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in terms of how to use body weight and that sort of like almost like the wrestle of trying to box a guy out, trying to scrap for a rebound. He said the thing is the franchise won't actually let him study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because he might get injured, but he watches videos and picks up stuff that way. So it's that kind of thing. It's not like he's out there trying to drop bodies or anything. He's just doing what he does.
Doing what he does, and we're doing what we do best, talking our shit about New Zealand sporting icons.
Icons.
As Stephen Adams is. That's it for the Anish Cast Stephen Adams edition. We will probably touch base with Stephen Adams
playoff time, maybe?
Playoff time, depending on how the Oklahoma City Thunder are looking. If they're looking like they could make a little run into the Western Conference Finals, which like upside, high ceiling potential could be the case, then we might have to do like one during the playoffs. But there's also a chance that the Thunder are knocked out fairly early in the playoffs as well. So we'll keep that one fluid. We'll play it by ear, and we'll go with the flow. Tomorrow, I believe we are recording a Plunket Shield domestic cricket that may extrapolate into a wider Kiwi cricket yarn. So stay tuned for that one if you love your cricket, and stay beautiful. Kia kaha, talofa lava. And a fitting way to end this podcast would be a simple namaste.